Passing permit admiration is required if tariff code. Sure, pass inspection. Article 001. The article is 001 here. No article electric jàre. Tí mo fẹ́ wò eléyìí àti article gas installation of the service has been completed. Article gas available stop. Call article gas. Service addresses. Hi, Brain. How's it going there? I'm doing great here. Basically, I'm not sure if this should be directed to you guys, but I've got a customer over the phone here. Say company's account. Can I give you the account number? 344 08056. That's right. So I do have Nicole over the phone here, and she's the commercial primary contact. So she did mention that she tried setting up services online and she was unable to proceed because I think she said she got a message that says she's unable to proceed due to the outstanding balance they do have on the account. So right now she's calling in
Hello,
saying
everyone.
outstanding balance was paid earlier this morning.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. All right. So, advisory manager, please, if it's possible, always make me the admin, or you can inform the person in charge to always make me the admin so that while I'm teaching, if I observe any form of distraction from any participants, is either I remove the person or I get to mute the person because I'm guessing that this amount of a person too would want to distract today's class. So, and I'm looking for
Absolutely.
how to
Go ahead,
mute
please.
him. I noticed that
Yes.
I can't really do that. So try to communicate with the person that can make me admin or automatically
Hey,
make me admin. You can hear his noise
hey,
now.
no, this is actually taking too much longer than expected. Also on the queue.
So I'll be waiting very fast. I'll be waiting, please. In fact,
Don't give up. Also,
Good evening, sir. Okay. I'm presently in contact with the person. She has not responded yet, but as soon as she responds, we are going to do the oath. So I'm talking to her. She has not yet responded yet to her. I don't know who this person is. I've sent a private message on Zoom, but I don't know if the person can see it. But I'm trying to like make sure he meets himself this time around so that we don't get removed like the last time. Good evening, Mr. Prince. Can you go ahead?
Oh, hello, can you hear me? I think I was muted. Oh, okay. I just noticed now. I think I was muted and I was speaking, not true. Uh, oh, okay. Okay, let me start from the beginning. I
I'm
don't
just
know.
hearing you now. You didn't know you have been
Oh,
speaking since. I've been trying to get your attention. I've not been getting a feedback. That's why I sent
yeah,
you a message.
yeah, I just checked and I realized that I was muted because I've been talking since about 12, 7:12, thereabouts. I've been talking. All right, no problem. I just noticed now I had to quickly unmute myself. So now we're going to be starting from the scratch. Let me quickly just repeat what I've said a few minutes ago. So I said speaking is the ability to express or communicate ideas, feelings, thoughts, and opinions, okay, in a verbal form. Remember, you have to communicate this in a verbal form. It has to be verbal communication, not written communication. There has to be verbal communication. That's speaking for you. All right. Now, in speaking, this verbal communication can either be in a formal setting or informal setting. Now, in the case of this exam, it's basically a formal setting. While when you're having a casual conversation with your friend, it is informal setting. I hope this is clear. Remember, we said that speaking is the ability to express, the ability to communicate ideas, your ideas basically, your feelings, your thoughts, your opinions based on the question. Based on the question. And the modality for this communication is verbal, meaning it is oral, it has to be spoken. Okay? And then if you look at in terms of setting, it is a formal setting. It is a formal setting because it's an exam situation. All speaking exam situations are usually formal, while casual conversation with your friend is purely informal. All right? And then in speaking, speaking doesn't just mean you have to start talking or saying things. No, in speaking, there are ways you moderate your answers. At some point, you have to use fictional narration, which means you have to use imaginary answers, but you need to try as much as possible to make it credible. In some cases, you have to be diplomatic when you're responding to examiners' questions. Do we understand? So, this is how speaking goes. You don't just talk in speaking. There are ways you say some things. There are ways in which you answer questions. You don't just answer questions anyhow. You answer questions in a certain way. And remember that each question is unique. Each question is, just as you can see from the screen, each question is unique. The way you answer the first question, all right, will not be the same way you answer the second question, will not also be the same way you answer the third question, and so on like that. So the way you answer questions are very, very unique. Okay? And remember that in the speaking test, you will never be asked questions about religion, talking about Islamic or Christianity or traditional. You will never be asked questions about that. Okay? Now, also, when it gets to the speaking test, you will also not be asked questions about deeply sports or entertainment because you know that not everyone would have the total idea about sport and entertainment. You will also not be asked questions deeply about politics because some people are political apathy. Okay, political apathy. They do not really have the idea of of politics, basically, how to communicate effectively when it comes to politics. People do not really have much ideas about that. Okay, so now you will also not be asked questions that has to do with gender related, such as feminism or patriarchy. You will actually not be asked questions relating to that aspect. Okay, so now areas where you'll be asked questions are basically education, finance, business, entrepreneur, traveling, health related, employment, societal issues generally. Those are areas where you should expect questions from when it comes to the speaking aspects. These are basic areas where you should expect questions from. Okay? Now, remember that the speaking doesn't take long. The speaking is basically about 15 to 20 minutes. You're done with the speaking. 15 to 20 minutes, you're done with the speaking test. Minimum 15 minutes, maximum 20 minutes, you're done with the speaking test. And when it gets to the speaking test, okay, I'm talking about the exam day, it is usually the last part. It is usually the last part. Okay, that's the last one you would do. The speaking is usually the last module that you would attempt on exam day. So you will see that the listening comes first, and that's 30 minutes on exam day. The moment you're done with the listening test, you would proceed to the reading test. The reading test is just 1 hour. Okay, once you're done with the reading test, you will definitely proceed to the writing test. The writing test is also 1 hour. Now, I'm sure when you're done with those 3 modules, that's the listening, reading, and writing, that should take about 2 hours, 30 minutes. You would have been very, very tired. All right. And then the examiner would give you about 30 to 45 minutes to take some rest, to have some rest. Okay. Now, once you're done resting, you now come into a room, okay, that has an office setting. Then the speaking test will be conducted there. Once you're done with the speaking test within 15 to 20 minutes, then you're good to go. Then you can now go home. All right. Now, pay attention. That particular 30 to 45 minutes that you're giving is basically for you to look through any possible, because you'll be giving your phone back, remember? Assuming you brought phone to the center, you'd actually be giving the phone back. So it's just for you to brush through, watch some couple of videos if you can, or you can actually have like a speaking practice with one of the test takers at that same center too. Okay, maybe like a random person who is also writing an exam too. So you could just have like you can just conduct a speaking test with the person. Okay, you can conduct a speaking test with the person. Very, very important. All right, so now the speaking tests are usually in 2 types, meaning there are 2 types of speaking according to IELTS. There is the face-to-face speaking test. There is the video call speaking test. I'm very certain that you would actually encounter just one. Is either you encounter the face-to-face speaking or you encounter the video call speaking. Remember that you do not have the privilege to select any particular one. Okay, IELTS will actually decide on whichever one it is. Whether you're going to do the video call speaking or you're going to do the face-to-face speaking. And this is how it happens at our center, basically. Now, once the examiner, the speaking examiner is at our center, okay, I mean at the exam center, then certainly it will be face-to-face speaking. But once the examiner is not present at the test center, it's most likely going to be a video call speaking. All right, it's going to be a video call speaking. And remember that by the examiner, I'm talking about the person conducting the speaking test. Okay, and the person can either be a white person or generally an African. The examiner can either be a white person or generally an African. In most cases, usually an African. And this African speaker is basically a trained IELTS speaker. a trained IELTS speaker. In the case of a white person too, he or she would also be a trained IELTS speaker. And let me also bring to your attention now the examiner that coordinated or administered the speaking test, okay, for you will not be the same examiner who would grade the speaking test. Let me say that again. The examiner that conducted the speaking test will not be the same examiner that will grade the speaking test. Meaning that another examiner will be called. All right. Another examiner will be called. Let me mute this person immediately. Yeah. So another examiner will be called to what? To grade the speaking. That's how it works. So please have it in mind that the examiner who conducted the speaking test with you will not be the same examiner who will grade it. A different examiner will be called upon to grade the speaking test. And the second examiner that is called upon to grade the speaking test doesn't have to know you, doesn't have to see your face. He or she will basically just listen to the audio. All right. And let me also bring to your attention, the speaking test is recorded from the very beginning to the end. The moment you start the speaking, all right, it will definitely be recorded. Yes. Everything, all your responses will be recorded. All your responses will be recorded. All your responses will be recorded. Okay? All your responses. I like the way I'm controlling it now. So once I hear noise from anybody, I can just quickly mute immediately. That's well moderated. Okay? So all your responses will be recorded. And remember that during the speaking test, okay, there are things you're expected to know. The first thing is the format of the speaking test. You need to be aware of the format of the speaking test. You need to be aware of the format of the speaking test. For instance, in the speaking test, there are 3 parts. And this is exactly how it will be on exam day. In the speaking test, there are 3 parts, meaning that there is part 1, there is part 2, and there's also part 3. There are 3 parts. There are 3 parts. There's part 1, there's part 2, and there is part 3. Now, in part 1 is called Interview and Introduction. That's the title. Part 1 is called Interview and Introduction. That's the title. For part 1, examiner will be asking you familiar questions, such as either traveling, or food, or study, or education, or relationship, or family, or residence, or interest and hobbies. These are all familiar aspects of life that I've mentioned. They are all familiar aspects of life. And these are areas where examiner will be asking you questions on. So you really do not need anybody to impersonate or to sit for you. You really do not need anyone at all. So these are familiar questions. If you ask question under residence, that's where you live in your country, you should be able to answer that. And remember, when you're asked a question, do not give a one-word answer. Make sure that your response is in detail. For instance, let's look at residence. If you're asked, where do you live in your country? It's quite different from where do you live in Nigeria. Where do you live in your country simply means that the examiner doesn't have an idea about where you're coming from. Where do you live in Nigeria implies that the examiner already knows the country from which you're coming from. And then when you're responding, what do? You provide your answers in detail. If it has to do with where do you live in your country, you have to mention your specific name of your country, the state, the local government area, the region. If it is southwestern part of Nigeria, if it's southeastern part of Nigeria, if it is north central or northeast, then mention the exact location. Also, go as far as mentioning the specific name of the street, the block number or plot number, the specific number of the address. You need to mention all of this specifically. Let me also bring to your notice that examiners love detailed responses. Examiner loves detailed responses. Provide a detailed response. Don't give one word answer. Where do you live in your country? I reside in Nigeria. No, that's not a good response. That's not a good response at all. Provide a detailed response. Now, that's basically for part one. So part one, you'll have a minimum of 4 questions. A minimum of part one, right? And then part on a particular subject. Let me give you an example. Look at this part one now. It is centered on friends. It is basically centered on friends. Can you see? So you should be able to answer this. For example, the first question, how often do you go out with friends? How often do you go out with friends? What are the keywords? So when you're able to answer according to the keywords that are there, often is a keyword. Go out is a key phrase. And then friends. How often? That's talking about the frequency. Whether always or occasionally. Okay? And you must give a reason why you go out always with your friend. You will give a reason why you go out occasionally with your friend. Then the next question, tell me about your best friend at school. Don't just mention the name of the person. Give a little narration about how you met this person. Okay? If both of you are still friends till now, talk about it. The third question, how friendly are you with your neighbors? If you're friendly with your neighbors, then give a reason. If you're not friendly with your neighbors, also try to give a reason. But remember, before you give reasons, you must answer the question. You are expected to answer the question before you give reasons. Now, have it in mind as well, too. When your answer is negative, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. When your answer is negative, it doesn't mean you're wrong. For instance, if you say that you're not friendly with your neighbor, it doesn't mean that is wrong, despite the fact that it is negative. Negative in the sense that we're looking at the verb no or not. You're not friendly with your neighbor, with your neighbors. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. See, let me tell you, examiner respects your opinion. Yes, they respect your opinion. They respect your idea. They respect your thoughts. Because the examiner is actually there to hear from you. The examiner is actually there to learn from you. I hope you're paying attention. So that's basically how part one will be. Interview and introduction. That's basically part one. And it's going to be a familiar question, trust me. A question that I'm setting that you have an idea about. Now, let's look at part two. In part 2, you would definitely be asked to make a description. Part 2 is basically making a description. You'll be given a task card. Now, the task card on exam day, all right, I mean, for a physical face-to-face speaking. Face-to-face speaking simply means that the examiner is present at the center, all right, and then you're going to be sitting directly opposite to the examiner while the speaking test ensues. Now, what it means is that you're looking at the examiner while you're answering those questions. Okay. Now, for video call, what it means is video call as a type of speaking means that when you get to the test center, after you're listening, reading, and writing, and it is observed that the examiner is not present at the test center, you'll be given a laptop, okay, whereby you would have to connect to the examiner via Skype or Zoom or Google Meet. When you connect to the examiner, you will be able to see the examiner at the other end. You will definitely be able to see the examiner at the other end, and then the whole communication will go ahead. Very, very important too. Very, very important. I hope this is very clear. Now, in part 2, you'll be given a foolscap sheet, remember, a foolscap sheet, remember. Now, in the foolscap sheet, okay, you will definitely, let me bold in this so that you'll be able to see it very well. I'm sure we can see it now. Okay, I'm sure we can see it now. So, you'll be given a foolscap sheet. Now, in the foolscap sheet, you will see the question there. And what's the question? Let's use this as an example. Describe a writer you would like to meet. Do you have any writer in mind that you would like to meet? Okay. Describe a writer you would like to meet. That's the question. And you'll be giving points. You don't need to bother about points. You'll be giving points. And what's the point? These are just basically the outlines, okay? The outlines in the sense that it will just serve as a guide for you. Okay? This will just serve as a guide for you. So the first one is who the writer is. I will advise you, do not pick a popular writer. Do not pick a popular writer. Don't pick a popular writer. Don't pick Wale Soyinka. Don't pick Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Don't pick all those ones. All right? Pick non-popular writers. Or there are two things to do. Is either you pick a non-popular writer, or you try as much as possible to creatively pick somebody. All right? Give the person a name. Characterize the person to have possessed all these good qualities of a good writer. Characterize the person. You can pick Johnson Emmanuel. There might not be anybody like that. Okay? Then characterize the person. Go give the person good qualities, good characteristics. Characterize the person. The danger about picking a popular writer is that if you mistakenly say something contrary to the person, examiner will be aware. And that means you're shooting yourself in the leg. So you have to be very, very careful. You have to be extremely careful. Do not pick a popular writer. It's either you pick a non-popular writer or you characterize the person. Now, when it comes to part 2, I would advise you can use fictional narration. What's fictional narration? You trying to, come up with your own idea. Even if it's something you've not experienced before, you've not seen before, put yourself in that situation. Characterize somebody. Make an imaginary presentation. The first one is who the writer is. Try to give any particular name of your choice. You can give John Emmanuel or Johnson Emmanuel or James Emmanuel. Anyone. It's fine. Because remember, when you're giving this higher education, examiner will give you a pen in case you want to jot down something. When you're giving this foolscap sheet, examiner will give you 1 minute to prepare yourself. Just 1 minute to prepare yourself. And of course, 1 minute is a very short time. So you don't need to start writing a epistle. What do you simply do? For each of these outlines, for each of these guides, okay, just use one word or a phrase to represent them. How do you do that? For example, who the writer is, just write James Emmanuel. You're done with that. What you know about this writer already, his writing skills. You're done with that. What you would like to find out about him or her, his inspiration or motivation. Done with that. And explain why you like to meet this writer. Just talk. Why do you want to meet this writer? To acquire his writing skill or to learn more about his writing skill. You can say less than 1 minute, I'm done with this. Okay. Now, once the 1 minute is over, what do you do? And you okay, and bear it in mind that you just have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to present. You have 2 minutes to express yourself. You have 2 minutes to say everything. Make sure that you're able to cover each of the outlines because you just have only 2 minutes. You simply have only 2 minutes. So within that 2 minutes, you should have covered all these outlines. It is possible for you to finish before 2 minutes. Don't forget. It's possible for you to finish before 2 minutes, provided that you've covered all the outlines. All right? Because the examiner would stop you once the 2 minutes is complete. You'll be stopped. You'll be notified. So what examiner is judging you by when it comes to tax 2 is your ability to cover each of the outlines. Each of the outlines. Now, that's basically how tax 2 is. That's basically how tax 2 is. Now let's look at tax 3. Let's look at tax 3. Now tax 3 is actually the last one. Okay, that's the last part, and it has more questions, about 6 to 7 questions. Tax 3 or part 3 has more of the questions. So you can have about 6 to 7 questions in tax 3 or in part 3. Okay. Now in part 3, pay attention that examiner will use a follow-up question. What do I mean by follow-up question? Now it means that what you have been asked in part 2, all right, part 3 will follow up with that. What you have been asked in part 2 will be very, very relevant, or it will align with part 3. That's the follow-up question I'm talking about. For example, if you can see this, you realize that part 2 is talking about writing. Writing. You can see that part 2 is related to it a bit. Part 3 is talking about reading and children. Okay, reading and children, which is similar or a bit related to part 2. All right, is a bit related to part 2, which is very, very important. Note also that most of the things you said in part 2, make sure that you're also able to carry along with it in part 3. Do not contradict yourself. Let's assume that in part 2, it was a fictional narration you used. Make sure that you're also continuing in that same pattern. Make sure you're also using the same fictional narration and it must align with what you said in part 2. If not, there will be a problem. You'll be contradicting yourself. All right. So most times, part 3 is always a follow-up question from part 2. And in a very rare case, part 3 can be an entirely different question from part 2. In a very rare case. All right. As you can see, part 3 is very, very long. And part 3 is actually a two-way discussion. It's a discussion topic. It's a discussion question. What do you mean by that? Now, this is usually a situation whereby you're going to be having more of an intensive discussion with the speaker or with the examiner. So the examiner will ask you the question, you would respond. He will ask you the question, you would respond. He will ask you the question, you will respond. You can see it's very much like a turn-taking process, of discussion, whereby you are asked the question and then you respond. You are asked the question and then you respond. That's basically how it looks. And be very, very careful. Part 3 can be a very tricky or technical question. Very tricky or technical question, whereby you don't just have to answer it anyhow. You have to be diplomatic. You don't have to sound extremely honest. And at some point, you need to use fictional narration. For instance, what kinds of books are most popular with children in your country? If you have a phrase like in your country, for context sake, you have to use in Nigeria, all right? For context sake, you need to actually mention a particular place where that particular thing is very, very paramount or active. So that's basically how it is. That's basically how it is. And then remember, also remember that when you're answering a question, like I mentioned earlier, try as much as possible for context sake, mention the specific name of your country when you have a question that asks in your country. Okay? So in your country, you have to mention the exact name of your country. Mention that name. So popular in your country. Talk about storybooks. Okay? We could talk about storybooks and then explain very, very well. And tell us the reason why you're leaning towards storybooks. And the next question, why do you think some children do not read books very often? All right. Remember to always answer the questions before you give reasons. For instance, why do you think some children do not read books very often? You can say, for example, I would like to consider distraction as one of the major factor why children don't read books very often in my country. Okay. Now, this distraction can spread across watching television, seeing a movie, and playing video game. You can see the way I was able to spread it and then start explaining. Okay. Most children usually forget that they are given assignments, and when they come back from school, the first thing they do is, okay, after eating, they try as much as possible to start watching television or seeing a movie or start playing video games. And this is very, very distracting. And then you can proceed to the next one. The next question is, how do you think children can be encouraged to read more? How do you think they can be encouraged to read more? Number one, they can be encouraged to read more by regulating their distractors. Of course, you know that their distractors are television, films, and video game. It can be regulated. They can only do that on weekends, which is Saturdays and Sundays at home. But from Monday to Friday, they are meant to concentrate on their books. That's very, very important. So once it's regulated, then it means that they are very much encouraged to do well. Can you see that now? So when you speak in that manner, it's understandable. You can go as far as giving other information if you have. Now, the next question again here is, are there any occasion when reading at speed? Are there any occasions when reading at speed is a useful skill to have? Yeah, there could be. There could be. Then you could talk about lecturing. um, in the law court, okay, for a lawyer. And if you're able to mention two, that's fine because it's talking about occasion, defending a case in the law, teaching students, you have to be able to read fast at speed. Okay. And then a broadcaster too, or a presenter, reading at speed is also very, very important. So we can look at different occasions and talk about it. And then explain why reading at speed is very important in these different occasions. You can explain it. Then the next one, are there any jobs where people need to read a lot? Of course, there are. What are they? In medical field, people need to read a lot. In language, people need to read a lot too. You can look at other aspects. Telecommunication or broadcasting, people need to read a lot. Okay, so you can look at different aspects where you think people need to read a lot or study a lot. Even in tech, people need to study or read a lot. All right, then the last question. Do you think that reading novels is more interesting than reading factual books? So in your opinion, you can pick anyone. You may think, oh, I prefer reading factual books and I consider it very interesting. Okay, then you can give a reason. From factual books, you can learn about history, you can learn about culture, okay? And then it is very much realistic than novels. Novels are just a combination of imaginary and fictional events, which might not be attestable to life. So you can give your reasons, give your ideas. So you can see that I'm just giving all this as preambles. You don't need to memorize the way I'm answering questions. You just need to learn the pattern. What pattern am I using? I'm using the ARE technique. What is the ARE technique in speaking? The ARE technique in speaking is give an answer, which is what A stands for, provide a reason for your answer, and give an example. That's all. Very, very important. Okay. Now, on Monday, all right, on Monday, I'll be able to teach you um, what examiners are looking out for in the speaking test, such as pronunciation, fluency, lexical resource, grammatical range, and accuracy. These are what they're looking at. I'm going to take time to explain those ones in details. And another thing again is what are the strategies that you need to know? What are the strategies that you need to know that would help you to scale or to ace this listening test? What are those strategies? I'm going to be explaining that too on Monday. All right. Now, let me take questions. Let me take questions. Let me take some questions. So, you can type your question. You don't have to unmute yourself. Just type in the question. I will read from here. Okay. Just type in the questions. I'll read from here. If you have any particular question at all to ask, specifically on speaking, so I'll be able to attend to them. All right. So I'm waiting. And if you feel everything is very clear to you, that means you may not need to ask questions. So I'm ready to entertain your questions. Your time starts now. Good luck to you. So quickly send it. All right, so I'm still waiting. So if you don't have a question, it means everything that I've been explaining. All right, so from Rita, I do not have any question, but to say that this session came across as easy to understand as long as you know what is expected of you in each task. Okay. All right, so I'm waiting for more. All right, so this one, read one. Said, can one look at the sheet with points while speaking? So what you need to do basically is you need to just memorize out of the 4 points, you can memorize the first two, talk about it, and then slightly look at the last two and then speak about that. And then the second question is, are the sheet and task card also given if the speaking test is virtual? You won't say it. If it's virtual, it will just be displayed. You'll see it, it will be displayed on the screen. You have access to it. If it is virtual, it will be displayed. You will see it on the screen. Examiner will just share his or her screen, then you'll see it. Then the third question, when you have a question that requires yes or no, do you wait for a follow-up question before you explain the reason for your answer? No. Once you just, for example, do you have a best friend? The moment you mention yes, all right, you expect to also explain why you consider that person as your best friend. All right? Or do you give reasons and example immediately? Yes, you do that. The moment you answer yes, then you proceed with reasons. And if you have examples, then you also do that too. Not all questions that you use examples, but if it is necessary in that particular question, then you can give an example. I hope I've been able to answer all the questions. All right, so I'm expecting more. More questions are expected.